Okay, should we maybe get started and let more people join as we go on? Welcome and thank you for joining us on the launch of our new business integrity tool. My name is Clyde Mosandmark and I work at Transparency International Sweden. And we have developed this tool together with Swedfund and Ethics Insight. And before I go through the agenda, I just wanted to mention that this meeting is being recorded and that we will probably publish it on TI Sweden's website as an introduction to the tool, just for your information. So just to quickly go through the agenda, we'll start by some introductory words from Transparency International Sweden and Swedfund. We have Ulrik Åshuvud, who is the Secretary General at TI Sweden, and Johan Ek, who is the Director of Business Integrity at Swedfund. And after that, Rupert Evold, the founder of Ethics Insight, will present the tool. Following this, we will have a Q&A session. Feel free to turn on your mic and your camera as well if you want. You can also write questions in the chat. Yeah, and I will now hand over to Ulrik.
Thank you very much, Clara, and welcome to this launch, which is then jointly hosted by Swedfund, Ethics Insight, and Transparency International Sweden. My name is Ulrik Åshuvud, and I'm the Secretary General of Transparency International Sweden. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. This is a tool that which has undergone some work over some time, and I'll give you the background to this because we're working together with our colleagues in UK, Transparency International UK, on investors' integrity. And we were also collecting data together with them for one of the reports on investing with integrity. And out of that we started a dialogue with Swedfund, which was also part of this project and the work with the report. We sat down to see what more could be done. Is there anything more? Have we done everything? And obviously we had not done everything. The report gave a good background, but also a bit of the needs assessment. What could be needed? What could be useful? And we came up with some type of tool. But now the question is whether this is going to be the useful tool that everybody can use, or is it the start of something else? And you'll get a presentation about that at this meeting and launch. So we came up with the idea with the business integrity tool, a practical and hands-on tool for impact investors in this context to help identify key business integrity issues during due diligence and provide guidance for risk mitigation. And the development has really been a collaborative approach between Swedfund, Ethics Insight, and TI Sweden. And thank you in particular to Swedfund for making arrangements so that we could continue using the funds provided initially to TI UK, also for this, and that was essential for the work. It is really important to know who and what you are investing in and who you're doing business with. The business world today is becoming more and more complex. Things are changing quite rapidly as well now, as we know in the world scene or on the world scene. But also businesses are more and more abused or even captured by organized crime, which is a setting that we see, in particular in Sweden today, we see that as well, which is a different development that we've been used to. So in any business community, a robust business integrity due diligence is therefore crucial. And if this tool can be part of that in the long run, we have done we've been able to assist in that work somehow. But it's through collaboration, and in particular with the collaboration we've had with Swedfund, Ethics Insight, and ourselves, it's also important that you develop things together. So that has been instrumental in this case. We focus in this tool at this point on impact investors, but we foresee that the tool can be developed to fit also for other areas, and that we will do as we move along. Thank you, and I'll hand over the word back to Clara.
Yes, thank you, and I will hand it right back over to Johan.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you, Ulrik. Hello, everyone. As Ulrik mentioned, this tool was inspired by Transparency International UK's second Investing with Integrity report. And at Swedfund, we really saw the need for a practical and hands-on business integrity tool, particularly for our private equity investees, to guide their due diligence processes. And the tool, it largely reflects how Swedfund and also many of our peers approach business integrity DD. In essence, most of the components that make up the tool are available in various places and various forms. But with this work, we've consolidated, developed, and streamlined everything into one easily accessible tool. And it's a free-to-use Excel-based tool that's fully adaptable. This is also the first version, and we look forward to seeing it develop further based on the input of those who start using it. And we would also like to thank Transparency International Sweden and also Rupert at Ethics Insight for this excellent collaboration. We are also very grateful to those other organizations that have contributed their expertise and comments. With that, I hand it over to you, Rupert, to present the tool and guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm going to do a sort of a brief walkthrough at a high level because I prefer to open it up to questions after that. I'm not going to spend too much time in this initial presentation going through the sort of the tool itself, because sometimes it can be a bit difficult to share Excel and PDF and flicking between the two, but please do write any questions you have in the chat or unmute and ask them as we go. As Ulrik and Johan both explained, this is the first version. We've benefited hugely from the input of people, including those on this call, and we will continue to do so from others. And again, I would really like to emphasize the point that Ulrik made, that in some of the conversations I've had about this tool, it is not just exclusively for investors. It would be very useful for anyone who's trying to diligence or understand key counterparties. So in sectors like healthcare, construction, renewable energy infrastructure, where you're very reliant on joint venture partners, EPC contractors, distributors, etc., it has considerable applicability. I will, however, be using the investor terminology for the majority of this presentation, but I just wanted to caveat that at the beginning. The tool is, we say the tool as if it's one thing, it's actually two things. There's the guidance, which is a PDF. Hopefully many of you have had the chance to review. If not, it's freely available on the TI Sweden website, and it's accompanied by an Excel. Why an Excel? Because we spoke to a number of funds in the preparation phase, and the feedback we got is we want something we can customize in our domain, adapt to our processes, delete, add, edit, etc. And that's what we've provided in this iteration. Maybe in future ones there might be alternative sort of technology, but for now it is a guidance document accompanying with a due diligence tool, and we'll walk through how and when that can be shared. But what does it do? As Johan explained, its purpose is to bring together information that does sit in various places, but you often have to search quite hard to find it. So how to do sort of screening and background checks and document review, questions you might want to ask about sector-specific and operational context risks, but also the so what, what do we do? What are the gaps? How do we address them? How do we prioritize? What should an action plan look like? So that's what we tried to answer, which is part of the reason that the tool's been we've taken our time developing it to try and be comprehensive, but at the same token, not overwhelming. The flow of it is broadly what most of you will be familiar with in terms of risk terminology. We start with gross risk, sometimes called inherent risk, and then the mitigation and the net risk afterwards. The first sort of steps are interchangeable, depending on how you operate, but there is a questionnaire which is sort of understanding about the background and any involvement in investigations, regulatory actions, political exposure, all the things you'd imagine. The integrity due diligence piece, which is sort of the background check, and also the sector-specific questions, which could come anywhere and actually will probably come throughout most diligences, including the commercial DD, where you want to understand how the potential investee or counterparty does business. It gets a little bit more straightforward in terms of flow after that, where once you've understood that sort of background, track record, reputation, and that there's no sort of obvious no-go deal blockers, Then you might proceed to the more formal due diligence, document requests, assessments, review of information, before sort of scoring, prioritizing what might need to be addressed, potentially conditions precedent for an investigation, and then the action plan. So that's going to be the flow of how I'm going to run through it. And as I said, at a relatively high level, but allowing time, hopefully, for questions. So the it doesn't display super well on a PowerPoint. This is just a screen grab, but the first element, the first tab of the Excel tool focuses on what we've called the BI questionnaire, which is the regulatory legal history, internal controls at a high level, sanctions and various compliance, political exposure. And it's in the accompanying guidance, we help you understand what to do with that information, severity assessment, mitigation, go or no go decisions. This is a composite questionnaire that has had input from a number of DFIs. So I would say from what I've seen, it's probably one of the most sort of comprehensive and best go-tos you're going to have for this particular bit of information. The second step is about the integrity due diligence, sometimes called the background check. And here we've broken it into the what you should be potentially thinking about including: registrations, licenses, watch lists, web research, offline checks, reference checks, etc. And also the contextual analysis to make sure you understand particularly in markets you're less familiar, the operating context risks, so rule of law, prevalence of corruption, ease of doing business, these type of issues that can have a significant integrity bearing. But after the what, we've also provided quite a lot of the how, so the where, which is where we listed how you might go about finding those sort of information, watch lists, registration, shareholdings, etc., and also provided some sort of tools and tips and guidance around some of the common challenges, because many of you will be operating internationally and the availability of that information can differ widely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And the how piece is includes guidance on web research. There's a very useful Boolean search from Swedfund on how to conduct offline record checks, on how to go about doing that contextual research so you can sort of improve your knowledge, particularly on markets that either are less familiar or very dynamic. So then maybe there's been changes in government or changes in regulation, etc. After the sector-specific questions sit in the back of the PDF tool. This is the sectors we started with. More may be considered in future editions. We split it into sort of two columns. The column on the left of the PDF, as you look at it, is questions that would normally be relevant in most contexts in that sector. So, for example, if it's around renewable energy, then you're going to have questions around licenses, permits, land clearance potentially. But if it's particular, then on the right-hand side will be context-specific questions depending on the business model. They're phrased in a open, non-adversarial way, so they're just normal commercial DD type questions to gather information to help understand where there might be potential risk issues. This bit is, in my opinion, in the work that I've done, it's very helpful and very important because risk differs considerably across sectors more than perhaps any other vector. So it's very helpful part of the tool, I feel. The document request list is a nice to have in the sense that it's a longer form list that you can delete from as appropriate. The reason we've kept it longer form is because often, particularly in smaller organizations, some of the controls may not sit where you might expect them. So to give one example, they may not have a conflict of interest policy, but they may have an HR manual which references how to deal with certain aspects of conflicts of interest. So we've kept it long so you can adapt it. You can decide whether to share it in its entirety or to cut it down and explain to the counterparty what you're looking to gather. And there's a column to allow them to feedback if they don't feel something is relevant, or maybe they want to refer you to another document. Then the assessment piece, this is a screen capture from the Excel tool, from the PDF that is helping you understand each column in the Excel tool. That's a very iterative process. You can, again, customize, delete, change, add, and the Excel tool is entirely unlocked, so you can change the terminology, the fields, the drop downs, etc., as you see fit. What it broadly does is it looks at best practice categories, which you'll be familiar with, so accountability and leadership, risk assessment, etc., and then asks common questions that would be relevant. We split it between financial institutions, non-financial institutions in 2 separate tabs. It allows space for follow-up questions and responses, which you may gather from the counterparty or the investee that you're sharing it with, or maybe you do it over this sort of format in an interview and gather the information. And then there's an assessment drop down from effective compliance through to nothing that will automatically score. And the utility of that automatic scoring is it quickly provides a visual that helps understand which area of the framework has the most significant gaps. So in this screen grab, the dummy text shows that the BI policy framework is performing most weakly. And when with that data on the action plan, it will automatically prioritize those areas that are performing worse to the top. So you're addressing in an ordered, structured way the identified gaps. So this is all automated for you within the tool, and so you don't have to do anything other than just select the level of compliance, and then it will populate this action plan. And finally, the implementation, it's good to have an action plan, but with implementation, we provided some guidance in the PDF as well that had a lot of helpful input, including from Rita on this call, about how to approach it, particularly with smaller organizations, to get it right-sized. Because one of the challenges they often face is they have investors, lenders, bigger business partners telling them to implement this and that, but it's not always from a risk-based framework. So we would argue that you start with a proper risk assessment, which is what this is, to help them identify what should be priority areas, and that the framework is built out in that risk context so that you're getting them sort of minimal wastage and maximum output from that process. So we don't just stop in the tool at the implementation, the action plan. There's some guidance on implementation. There's also guidance at the back of the PDF on editing and amending the Excel tool and how to do that and maintain all of the functionality. So I'll stop at that juncture and then stop sharing my screen, but I can, if it's, I'll just show you briefly. If it's helpful, I have both of the tool itself, the Excel and the PDF on screen, and I'm happy to sort of share and walk through any particular bit that you may want to go over in detail, but over to you.
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions? You can just turn on your mic and ask. Yes, Barrett.
Thank you. I have a question. And Rupert, thank you very much for this. Highly interesting. My question is with respect to taking a risk-based approach. For example, one might look at the country where they're operating, and it's Transparency International. My question is with respect to, what if you're operating in a country that is just generally overall risky from an integrity perspective, a security perspective? In this case, I'm referring to Somalia. So it's sort of like, if everything's risky, nothing's risky. That's my query, is we're operating in basically one country where there is a lot of risk. How would you say we approach that, as opposed to if you're working in 6 different countries with varying TI ratings, etc.? Thank you.
Johan, would you like to respond, or would you like me to start?
No, please, Rupert.
It's a great question. Thank you. I think there is in the guidance, there's a bit about contextual risk analysis that covers some of those areas that you're talking about. The point of having, I think what hopefully is never going to be easy in a very complicated markets like that, but the sector questions I hope would help prioritize down, because there's, as you'll know, there's a difference between an infrastructure project in Somaliland versus, say, transportation and logistics into Mogadishu. The same country, but it still presents different risk profile. So my focus would be on using the sector questions coupled with that contextual risk questions to kind of triage down to where do we start. So what is likely to be the most acute risk even in this context, and then start somewhere. And that, I'm very familiar with these challenges. We're just working on a project in South Sudan, and it's in the midst of conflict. And that's exactly the question we have to wrestle with, was where do we start with so many issues? And the answer is by using sector and contextual questions to kind of triage it down to those that are most likely to intersect with that business model, and also their, the critical aspects of that business model. So there's, in the example I gave, if you're working in transportation and logistics, then timeliness and penalties and things like that is maybe something you might need to examine as a risk mitigant, because you're going to face extorted demands. So that's what that would be in my answer, but welcome to inputs from TI Sweden or Johan.
Yeah, maybe I could just add a thing. Thank you, Rupert. I mean, there is also another part of this that you've taken the decision to try and invest or have business relations in this context. Already there, you've gone through. Hopefully, you thought about why you're doing that and all the risks just being on that market in itself, which lends me to thinking about that you need to have more resources available for mitigating the risks that are there. It's not the normal context as in other countries that you might have less risk, because already there is a part of an investment, that the resources that you need to spend to meet those risks are generally higher. And I think that's something that you need to bring on into that context yourself. I don't know, the tool in itself will not put into that level. I guess that you've already taken that decision, but maybe Rupert, you can dwell on that.
Yes, I mean, we unfortunately within the tool we haven't been able to kind of recommend the adequate level of resourcing. But I was looking at the other screen as I gave the sort of sector questions around that, the transportation and storage example. I mean, I think Barrett, you'll know that the risk mitigation is obviously a mixture of the controls, but it's also going to be culture and training people on how to respond in certain situations, particularly if they're operating in areas where their security might be compromised. So we have, I think, mentioned different parts of the tool where there may need to be sort of adaptation around elements of the kind of the due diligence, but also the framework that's put in place within, I think it's 33 pages, within a 33-page guidance document. We're not going to be able to get down to that level, but hopefully it would at least help with a sort of Pareto principle, getting you kind of to identify the 20% of areas that are likely to create 80% of risk in a context like that. But yeah, it would require a lot more of that sort of planning, because you're going to face risks. So it's less a question of mitigating if events. It's more a case of how do we plan for when events. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's excellent. And two of my colleagues on the line, Somali, know this all too well. But this is wonderful context, and we're grateful for this training.
Great. Do we have any other questions or comments, or someone wants to see more in detail on a part of the tool?
I have a question.
Yes, thank you.
Wait, let me show my little face there. Hi. Yeah. No, my question is, I think this tool is really exciting because all of a sudden, in a very structured way, it enables all kinds of individuals to ask questions at a very sort of specific level of expertise, and then, going through the assessment process and coming out with kind of a risk assessment that can be communicated and explained, and which is really important. Now, one thing that I really I struggle with myself is when you take such a tool, an assessment tool, and then you put it in the hands of people who actually have no expertise or knowledge about business integrity, which is often the case, right? In many of our organizations, it's like, oh, no, we don't need more staff. We can just hand it all to the project manager, right? Or to the student who's supporting the project manager or something like that. Yeah, I just this is like, I love the tool, and I just worry that it can be used by that. And what kind of advice or thoughts do you have for us about, I mean, how can we safeguard against that kind of, decisions where they're going to, continue to not invest because all of a sudden we've got this great tool that can just do the work for us?
Johan, would you like to?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rita, of course, and I think it boils down to a lot of competence in this area. And if there's no competence, of course, it's a challenge. But still, the aim of it has been to help at least those organizations which might not have any BI person in place. Most don't. At least it's an attempt to get us on the way there. But listening to you, maybe we should also have some kind of training or in relation to the tool going forward as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to ask you to invest more of SWED funds resources and transparencies and resources in this, but I do think training is always a key thing. And even in my own organization also, I see that when depending on what model you have for resourcing something, it's like they think that, oh, you can just spread something across the project managers. But if you do that, actually what you do is then you just, like, if you can imagine, you just push the bubble, the need up to another area. Then you need a huge investment in training and support and advising and monitoring, right? So there are different models, but training, training is an essential component. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. Christine, you had a question.
Not a question, but this seems like a very interesting tool. Do you think you can take some time and show us the tool more in detail?
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. I think,
Thank you.
Rupert, you can share.
Yeah, just so I understand quickly, is what would be most helpful to look through the Excel working of it or the accompanying guidance?
The Excel, I think.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. So it's structured, the tabs have numbers along the bottom. The questionnaire is the first tab, as I mentioned. It's hopefully the most straightforward element of it, where it's the classic kind of background check questions that even at a lower level we would be asked to fill out if we're trying to open a bank account. So it hopefully isn't anything hugely surprising to an organization that's seeking investment. So it's political exposure, sanctions, past regulatory actions, etc. The document request list, we've tried to put in these caveats here at the top in blue to explain that, as we said, we went for more rather than less because it's easier to delete than it is sometimes to add. But there is space here for comments from the organization. Everything is fully editable, so if you wanted to delete things out or change it, you're entirely able to do so. And then in the accompanying PDF, there is if I go to the right bit of the document request list, whenever somebody might get a bit stuck, there is an explanation, including these pro tip boxes where we talk about sort of inconsistencies, or potentially, let's say you're doing project finance, you might find that in the country where the investment is happening, they have a localized policy that's slightly conflicted with the head office. So we've tried to sort of use the experience we've had in past instances to give people sort of tips and tricks that would hopefully help at each stage. Then the actual assessment itself is split, as I mentioned, between non-financial institutions and financial. The categories are all selected from what I hope is relatively familiar terminology, but if you are unhappy or feel that it doesn't capture anything, we've kept everything in the drop-down data here fully editable, so you just would go and change it there and it would automatically update into these drop-downs, but hopefully it's fairly standard. Again, we went through a lot of iterations of the questions, and what we found is when we started to really condense it down, then we would have get feedback around, well, what about this, what about that? And so what we felt is it's probably best to try and strike a balance somewhere between like exhaustive and too little, which is a difficult balance to strike, but enabling people to, maybe it's easier to read here, enabling people to, again, edit, delete as they see. In terms of, to Rita's point, you could potentially, obviously because this is fully editable, you could delete out other tabs and then share this and then delete the subsequent columns with the assessment. If you wanted to send it to an organization, have them complete. I would suggest that particularly if you're dealing with a smaller or much more immature organization, that it's easier to ask about some of these questions, maybe not using sort of our language. So you might not say, do you have an audit committee? You might say, is there a governance structure in place to manage these issues? And then you would sort of, as you're interviewing them, type out the responses. That's how I work anyway. Then the assessment criteria, again, is effective, improving, and conclusive, no or limited, and not applicable. Not applicable will automatically go to a red highlight, and that's just so if you have shared it with someone, or the work has been updated by, to Rita's point, by maybe an intern or someone less familiar, you can go back and double check that not applicable genuinely is not applicable. And then if it's effective or inconclusive, it comes with scoring. Again, if you would like to modify the scoring, there's you can do that yourself, and that scoring will then automatically populate this output, which is both in this table form and in this table, and then the graph form. Both of it's the same data but just represented differently, because we know sometimes you have to put it into investment reports. And finally, as I mentioned, your priority areas. So in this case, the policy framework, risk assessment, accountability, and leadership, they will automatically reorder to go towards the top. So that's, I've gone over it relatively quickly, but you still got your hand up. So is there something I haven't covered you'd like to go back on?
It looks really interesting. Just one follow-up question.
Sure.
Has GDPR been taken into consideration? So business partners, so they are not asked, to provide information and personal data regarding criminal convictions or violations of bribery laws and so on.
So I'll let Johan field that, but the questions that would be related to past wrongdoing, most of the questions in the assessment relate to what I would call sort of what you have in place and implementation. So the questions are hopefully relatively benign, like, do you have this policy? How do you implement it? Do you conduct training? The
That's
questions that would be potentially more sensitive are these ones, but I'll let Johan speak to that.
No, it's not. I mean, GDPR, I think each organization needs to look at that themselves in a way, because it's a tool aimed at also parties outside Europe, and I'm thinking particularly on the integrity checks, the IDD, where you may come up with information on criminal activity as well, in particular. So of course you need to take that into consideration.
Okay, any other questions? Doesn't seem like it.
Maybe I could just add one thing concerning the development of this. As we said, it's 1.0, the first version, but also the fact that there is an interest, as Rupert mentioned, that there's an interest from other sectors in the sense that how this was impacting investor focus, but already we're hearing from others and saying that what can we do? Can we use it? It is usable, as you say, it's adaptable already from now. But obviously the feedback on that, if you see, is important for us, because then we can probably assist you in developing it or changing it if you need that. But also the fact that was now highlighted, the need for training, but also that we could look into the possibility of doing that would be mainly online. But thirdly is the development of a specific tool for your organization could be possible as well to discuss, but then you contact us directly and we'll see how to do with that. And that could also be a smaller group of companies who feel that, or institutions that feel like, can we sit down, and then we could probably facilitate that somehow. So there are different ways of going forward with this, but I think the main thing now is to start using it and see all the nice things that are there, but also the flaws that might be there that we could assist you in making better.
Yes, okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then I think we can end it here. But thank you so much to everyone for coming, and thank you to Johan and Rupert and Ulrik as well. And yeah, if you find this tool useful, please share it with your colleagues or people you think might find it useful as well. And also, please get back to us with any feedback or if you have questions. We will.
Clara, just one more thing. That when you,
yes,
it might be useful for when you're thinking of using it and you wanted to send the request via our website, because then you will also receive updates. The only GDPR, speaking about GDPR, there is a GDPR clause there, but we will also not use it for anything else, but sending you possible updates and so on. So it is actually good to go that way, because then you will have a conversation, sort of feedback from us as well if there are changes that have been made.
And I've added the link now in the chat. Sorry, I forgot to do that. But yeah, and then you can find the tool on our website. Yeah, thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great work.